Shalom and welcome to another edition of our Daily Bread where we discuss the weekly Torah portion. This week's Parashot is the fourth and fifth Parashot of the book of Vayikra, also called Leviticus, and it's called Tazria Metzora. It's a dual portion this year. And Tazria and Metzora means conceived and leper. And this week's Parashot we see is in the book of Leviticus, starts in 12:1, goes through 15:33, and the half Torah is in 2 Kings 7:3 through 7:20. So this week's Parashot, this dual Parashot, my message for 2012-13 is called Waiting to See. And just a quick recap of what's happening in this week's Parashah. This week's Parashah, what we see is we start off with these laws of conception and the nidah, the time of separation, depending if it's a male or a female child. And then we get into the laws of leprosy and everything from seeing when it happens all the way through the cleansing process, the interaction with the priests, and then we get to the half Torah where we get the story of the lepers. So my message is called Waiting to See, and this week's message is interesting because one of the things that we don't think about is sometimes we read these stories and we don't think about the actual interaction and the mechanics of what this would look like. We don't live in a Torah-based society. We don't live where we have the presence of Elohim and the temple and dealing with those things, the sin that had to be dealt with. Right now, we have all kinds of sins. We have all kinds of different things, and we're not really dealing with them. Not in the way that a Torah-based society would deal with them. So it's almost as if everything's put off right now. Like most people don't even give it a mental acknowledgement. Whereas in a Torah-based society, you would need to be going to the temple for whatever reasons, and you needed to know the level and the condition of your cleanliness. You need to know what sacrifices to bring within what time frame for your sins. There was an outside of the camp where people would be sent out for various reasons, and you'd be leaving your house and going outside the camp, and that could be very disruptive to your life, to your business, to your family. And then there was a process of interacting with the priests to be able to be brought back in, and then the offerings as well that you would have to take up to the temple. So we don't really live in a situation where we're dealing with those kind of things in a real-time scenario where we're having to deal with our sin and think about our level of cleanliness. And so this parashot is very interesting to me because when you don't just skim over it and go, okay, yeah, I'm reading these various things, but you have no real life context to put it into, when you start to think about it and what that meant and what the process was like and what people were doing, this concept of waiting to see is found all through the parashah this week. The first way we see this is this concept of childbirth. And back then they weren't going in to get an ultrasound and knowing what the sex of the baby was. They, would have to wait and see. The baby would pop out and they'd go, okay, well, we just had a girl, or we just had a boy. And it's interesting when we talk about this boy-girl right in the very beginning. My first point that I make in this message is about roles and how the roles change us, and roles really give us context. And there's a difference from being a boy and there's a difference from being a girl. There's a difference in society. I know our society tries to make they try to get rid of roles, and it's really an attack on God's biblical standard which He sets up. They want male and female to be one, so much so that you see the parable of it, like the rise of homosexuality and supposed gay rights and things like this. what it is the structure, the model of a gay marriage is when you don't have those roles of a man and a woman, when you don't have the roles where the sexes are different, this concept where the sexes are same, that's like the homosexuality. But it's not just in homosexuality. We see the rise of that now, but it's been happening before this. The attack on the structure inside the house has been happening before us. You see all these, in TV, all these sitcoms. What do you have? You have the idiot husband who is passive, and really the woman wears the pants in the family and decides what goes on and what doesn't, and bails her fumbling idiot husband out of making all these mistakes, and she really teaches him the lessons and does all that. We have a reversal of roles and an attack on the roles to say that the husband isn't the leader of the household, that the husband isn't the one who is learning and wise, who's trying to, as it says, wash his wife in the Word. It says, as Mashiach, husbands love your wives, as Mashiach, as Christ loved the congregation or the church, washing her in the Word to present her blameless. What you have in TV is you have the opposite. You have the woman bailing out the husband because he's such an idiot, or he has to beg permission to go do something, and it's a destruction. She's in charge and she's the leader, and he's not, and he's jumping at her every whim. And the problem is that's that same model of homosexuality. It's that model of that structure breakdown in the house. Either it's being reversed, right, where the woman then rules over the man, and the man submits to the woman, or you have another destructive one, which is the two are equal, right? That becomes the secondary cell. Everybody's so afraid to say, it says, husbands submit to your wife. Well, I don't want to seem like a chauvinist, or I don't want to seem old-fashioned, or I don't want to, upset the women. I don't want to make them think that their position is any lower. So, we're equal. We're just different, but we're equal, and this and that. And I see it all the time. I see it in Messianic relationships, and I see it all the time in the Messianic congregations. You see, the husband who's very submissive to the wife, and you don't see it the other way around. Ultimately, she's passive aggressive, and she gets her way, and that's how it is. I mean, I've seen it rear its head in ugly ways, in ways where friendships were changed and things were done because of the relationship of the woman and the power of the woman over the husband. And this is something that has to stop, and the roles have to get back to godly roles. We're not equal with Messiah. People talk about being the bride of Christ and all this and that. Well, you know what? You're not running the show. You think you're going to tell Messiah how things are going to be done? You think you're going to tell the King of Kings how the household is going to be run, or whether he can go out and spend time doing something with his friends or something like that? You've got to be crazy. If you think that you're going to say, well, I'm the bride, but I'm really equal. This is really not about him or being in charge, and I don't really have to submit to him, but hey, you know what? We're just cohabitating here together. Again, you're crazy if you think that's the way it's going to be. It doesn't matter whether women are going to kick and scream when they hear that message or not. It doesn't matter. See, the problem started back with Adam and Hava, because the same thing happened. Hava listened to the serpent who was beneath her instead of her husband, and God who was above her. And the husband listened then, it actually says it in the curse, because you listened to your wife. Now that doesn't mean a husband shouldn't listen to his wife, but that means that his sin lied in the fact that he didn't show leadership in that situation, where he should have killed the snake, grabbed his wife, slapped her hand if he had to, and said, no, you're not going to eat that because you would die. He's protecting her life. Why would he sit back and watch her when God said, "In the day you will eat thereof, you will surely die," why would he sit back and just let his wife make such a horrible choice? And then in the story, it goes even a step further, where she then not only rules over herself and makes that choice and disregards her husband and her husband's instruction and God's instruction, where it ultimately came from, where the authority really flows down in that whole structure of hierarchy. She disregarded that, and then she flipped it. Now she was the hierarchy. Now she's going to feed it to her passive husband. And at that point, the whole thing went crazy. And then when time to blame comes, he said, he pointed at her, but it's the woman. As if the woman who was ruling over him, like saying, well, it's not me. I was under this rulership, and I could have no power to do anything over that. And it's like, no, that ain't going to cut it. You've been put in a position. If you're the king, if you're in authority, if you're the master, whatever the position is, right? The higher the position, the more responsibility there is. And you can't blame the people who you are have authority over. You can't blame them for why you didn't do your job. It's the same thing we saw with Aharon. Notice with the golden calf, he tried to blame the people. Oh, well, you know how the people are. No, but you're in charge. See, if Moshe was there, they wouldn't have made a golden calf. But Aharon wanted to blame the people and say, well, it was them when he's the leader. That ain't going to cut it. Okay? When you're the leader, the buck stops with you, and you've got to learn how to go into that position, and you've got to learn how to do that role. And so in the beginning of this week's parashah, we see that there's that these roles, these things are not all equal. To say things are all equal is to say that there isn't a structure, that there isn't a hierarchy in the system. Well, when it says King of Kings, guess what? Do you think the other kings are going to go, you're a king, Mashiach, I'm a king too? We're about the same. My word's as strong as your word. You don't have any more say than I do. It ain't going to happen. It'll get squashed. He's the King of Kings, right? That denotes a position. Even in the New Testament, it says there's you and Apollos and all that, and things past, things present. That's all you, and then there's Mashiach, and then there's the Father. Okay? So it puts a hierarchy. It sets up a standard of a structure. And in the same way, everything has structure. The husband, the wife has a structure. The husband, wife, and kids, they all have a structure. Why is Israel consistently being called the rebellious children? Right? Because there's a structure there. Why is Israel being called the harlot or the adulterous wife? Right? Same thing. Because there's a position there, there's roles, and there's rules within those roles. And just in the same way, Israel says, Yaakov, you are my servant, Yaakov, you are my servant. There's a servant-master role right there. And there's a servant and a master and a God. There's a mankind God role. All of these are different roles, and there is a difference in position. And these are important. And we get that in the very beginning of this week's parashah, when it starts talking about the differences. Why would it be different? Why would it be a longer time of separation if you give birth to a female versus if you give birth to a male? Like that, to me, is a great point where it should cause you to question, say, what would the difference be? Why is there any difference when it doesn't really need to be a difference? Well, those are good questions for you to ask, and good questions lead to good study. And as you study and you ask good questions, it directs and guides your studies. It takes you deeper down the path to be able to say, wow, I wonder what that's all about. Well, you could do a study on male and female. Look at the differences when the same thing happens, or in the same situation. When are things the same for male and female? When are they different? What does all this mean? In the Niddah, the time of separation, well, what is it? Is it the husband who's separated from the wife, or is it the wife? It's her time of separation, and I've seen that before, where well, I'll go, sleep on the sofa. Most people aren't even observing Nidah, or the time of separation, for a woman's regular monthly cycle. They're not sleeping in separate beds as the Torah provides for. There's no separation there. They just stay together. And then if there are very many people who are attempting to honor that law, then sometimes, again, these are all little reflections. If the husband is passive in that relationship, many times he'll get up and leave the bed. As they don't understand what they're doing when you break the structures of God down. See, they're not just independent. They're connected to many structures and many patterns and many models and parables. You see, the whole concept of Nidah, and I'm not going to get too deep into it right now, but this concept of the wife or the bride being separate from her husband, those create prophetic models, right? She's sent away, okay? And that is for a reason. It's because of her uncleanness. And there's a time when she's going to come back into her husband's bed. And there's very big significance there. And if a person's following those laws, that's a time of fertility when she is likely to then be more fruitful as they're coming back, if they're following the laws of Nidah. And ovulation cycles and things like that. See, all this, it isn't just a surface level thing. There's deeper understandings of it. And so when you observe God's law, just like when you rest on the Sabbath, there's studies that are done that show that the actual rejuvenation, I haven't looked at the study, a friend of mine was telling me about it, who actually wasn't a Sabbath keeper, but he saw the article or whatever, and it reminded him of me, and he said, oh yeah, there's this thing where it actually showed that the rejuvenation levels happen on, from Friday night at sundown till Saturday night at sundown, are their greatest for how your body rejuvenates, and there was an increase in this study or whatever during that time, and I thought, it's very intriguing, but it's not surprising to me because God made us, and He knows. I don't think what He says is arbitrary. I don't think it has to have a provable reason. It can be arbitrary. We can do things just because God said so, but I think that He also builds in natural blessings when people observe those things. I think that there's a need for rest from Friday night at sundown till Saturday night at sundown. And I think when you observe that, you get that special blessing of rejuvenation and revivement. And I think the same things with Nidah. When you observe these things, these laws, I think there's extra blessings that are attached to those. So we start this week's parashah with really what is only a few sentences about this these different roles of the male and the female child, and the time that they'll be separated is doubled, 40 for a female and 80 for a male. And, again, let those things be things that cause you to ask good questions, like what's the difference? Why double? Why 80 days? What's the significance of that number? Why 40 days? What's the significance of that number? These things all matter. It really gives us a context. You see that surprise, right? When we talked about waiting to see, they're waiting to see, is it a boy or a girl? That's a big difference. There's a big difference in roles in the biblical world if you have a male child versus a female. A female, as it says, you're giving your daughter away. That's true, because ultimately the daughter comes under the authority of her father until she's married. At the time that she's married, she comes under the authority of another man. Now, he's under the authority of his father, and his father's before him. They're honoring their father and mother. That son, the son, is to be like his father. So the son, the burden, the honor of honoring your father and mother, it means carrying on their will. Just like Mashiach said, not my will, but thy will. So there's an importance to bloodlines. And the bloodline, unlike Jewish teaching and modern observance, they think that the bloodline goes through the woman, which is a total error in my opinion, and for multiple reasons. But if you dig back why they think that, it goes through It's about Ishmael, and it's about the difference between Hagar and Sarah, and the all of that, the bloodlines and the promise and stuff like that. But it's fabricated, in my opinion, because when you look at it from a biblical only standpoint and look at the Torah, you can see the bloodlines aren't talked about. It doesn't talk about, you'll be, you're the children of Sarah. It doesn't say that. It says you're the seed of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, because there's a will and a burden, and again the details matter, that flows through that bloodline of the men. And so it doesn't matter, if you had back then they had multiple wives. Not all of the wives were necessarily from that tribe. Some of them, if you look at some of the great people in the Torah, had foreign wives, and of course they become citizens of Yisrael, but they were foreign. And the fact is that those bloodlines stay with the men. And so if you have a man-child, it's even in the ancient non-biblical times. If you were royalty, you needed a son. You needed an heir. The son was the heir. Okay? It wasn't really passing on to the women, because ultimately, just like with the biblical stuff, your daughter goes off and the two become one. Well, now she needs to submit to the will of her husband, and her husband is submitting to the will of his father, which is a way he's honoring his father, just like Mashiach said, not my will but thy will, because he's the son. The son does the things of the father, just like it says in the New Testament. Okay, when he says, you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He's not going to do his own will. His goal is to be just like his father. That's something we've lost in our society today. Now people say, well, he's just the way he is. Everybody's different. All my sons or my daughters, they got a mind of their own. Well, they shouldn't have a mind of their own. They should be striving to be like their father. It's biologically put in there that their ability to mimic, children mimic and copy. It's how they learn their world. And in the beginning, if the father is actually spending time with their kids, he should be picking up on them. If the father's taking an active role, there's no greater role model for a son than his father. And if you don't take up that role, if you let TV or the schools, public school systems, or whatever, strangers, daycare, I don't know what it is, but if you let other people take on that role, or their peers or their children, then they'll become like the people who they hang around. They're huge sponges when they're young, and that's when they need to see their father and see the right examples, see the good examples, just like the disciples needed to see Mashiach, like the children of Israel need to see Mashiach, the example for them, in order to learn to be like him. And these are important. So these roles are all important. Daughters need to learn from their mothers how to act like a wife, how to act like a godly woman, how to do all these things. When they see mom disrespecting dad or saying something she shouldn't or whatnot, then that's very important. People don't deal with that. You know who's going to deal with that? Her husband later. Because when your daughters aren't raised right, they're like a field, and you're preparing it, and you're going to give that field to another man. And is that going to be a stony field, or is that going to be a well taken care of, well cultivated field that you as a great father to your daughters are going to present a great, well worked? There's not weeds, there's not rocks. Here is a great field. Now she should be ready for her husband, just in the same way we're prepared for Mashiach. You see, we're just out of touch. If you wanted to be the bride of a king, you know what they did? They spent their whole life preparing for that. Not being just who they want, how they want. Maybe they should just go get a college education and just, do whatever, and they could cohabitate with the king. That would never fly historically. Okay? People will raise their daughters up in purity and in graciousness and in beauty and intelligence and all manner of things, preparing them for this time when they could be presented to a king, to prepare them for this time when they could maybe have a shot at catching the eye and the favor of a great king, because a king also was not brought up foolishly. A king was brought up and trained in all the languages and skills and nobility and wisdom and all of these things that went with that great position. And see, I hear it all the time, people talking about, oh, we're a nation of kings and priests. Oh, well, act like it then, because I don't see it. So you dedicate your time, and you focus, and you study wisdom, and you make sure that your actions are correct, and you make sure that you're learning all these right things and being above reproach and doing all of this and preparing yourself and doing all that. Because a priest's job is very important. A king's job, super important. Everything you do really matters, and you impact other people. Your mistake harms other people. Okay, it's the same way a husband's mistake harms his wife. A husband's mistake harms his children. A wife's mistake harms her husband. A wife's mistake harms her children. And then anybody else who sees that. It was sad, because this week, it's funny how something always kind of happens in the week that kind of works into the Torah portion. But this week my wife was having some health issues, and we had to take her to the emergency room. And here we got all of our kids, got 6 kids, and we have to find somebody who can watch them so that I can be with her. And not an easy task. People are busy. People, it's a lot to take on 6 kids. So we find somebody to take on the kids, and the kids apparently, I dropped them off, everything was fine, blah, blah, blah. I'm worried, anytime, because, if people don't have a lot of kids, it can be overwhelming. It can be overwhelming when you do have a lot of kids. But if you have 3 or 4 or 2 or none, right, forget it. I wouldn't do that to somebody unless I had to, because it could be overwhelming if you're not used to managing that many little ones. And so I get a text, right? Everything seems fine. I said, hey, okay, well, I'm going to stop by. I'm going to go get some dinner squared up and drop it off for you. And they're like, oh, so-and-so offered to take them too. And I was like, well, they were sick, so I don't really want to take my kids over there, get all my kids sick, and then on top of my wife being in the hospital, I have a bunch of sick kids. That does not sound like fun. So I said, no, I'd probably pick them up before that. And I didn't think about it at the time. I was busy, worrying about other things, whether, are they saying that because they're having a tough time, which is what the case ended up being. Well, I ended up, I get a text from the husband saying, hey, come pick your kids up. And I was like, okay, that was weird. Did something happen? But, it wasn't the time and place to have a discussion about it. I was trying to take care of my wife, and now I have to take care of my kids too, and that altered our plan. So I went and picked up my kids. Well, I found out that, they'll tell on each other, and I said, I knew something didn't sound right, like, why all of a sudden come pick up your kids when I was just going to drop dinner off and then come back and pick them up? I figured maybe they were getting out of hand. Well, yeah, my second-born son was acting out and joking, as he called it, and had said butthead, and had told the other the people's kids. They had young kids, young boys as well, and that's not something that I tolerate, but like anything else, kids can see things or hear something from somebody else and say naughty things when they're not supposed to. Well, now he's over there said that, and they didn't like that their kids were hearing that, and so I get a call, and I told my son, I said, you brought shame upon our name, and we didn't really know have a great relationship with those people very much, what they were offering to help. And I said, you've shamed our family, because they're going to look, and it's a shame on me. And I took the responsibility too, that here's my son over there saying something that is not okay, and not only bringing shame on our family, but I can see why they might ask, "I'll come pick up your kids," because they don't want their kids acting like that or saying something inappropriate if they're not used to hearing anything like that. So it was embarrassing for me, and the point is that that goes to that son, that's a role, that's an important thing. Yes, they're young, he might be young, but that's not an excuse. Even little kids, they represent, those men represent my family. They represent me. They represent my parenting, what I find acceptable, and and that was a shame. And that's what I explained to him and told him that, you really did shame our family, and those people might not ever, invite us over to spend time around their kids, because they don't want you saying something and then their kids start saying it, and that was really an interesting thing, because we don't think about those things. We don't think about these roles and how important they are and how important we are. We're the same way with God. What is it that we're doing that's bringing shame to God? What is it that, if I'm a man, I may be in charge of my household, but I still have to submit to God, and He's my authority. And how am I shaming His name? By making bad choices, thinking I can do that. So these roles are important, and in the same way, how did Hava shame her husband? By listening to the serpent and by disobeying God. And then how did she shame her husband? By actually having him do a sin as well and drawing him into the sin. She didn't gain anything. She lost it for herself and for her husband. And that's what sin does. So, it's just something to think about, even though we only had 2 or 3 verses here about these, the various roles. I think it's important to see the subcontext of what's behind that. Is that it's different if you're a boy than if you're a girl. It's different for the parents. It's different for the children. And, these are things that you don't squish with all the talk about, gay rights and gay marriage and all this and that. Yeah, it matters. It's not about just live and let live and, it doesn't matter because it doesn't affect me. No. When our societies, it does affect all of us because we're connected. It's what we see. Just like those kids coming over and, hey, it's not their kids, and hey, they're only watching them for one night. I mean, is that going to really make a difference? Well, it does. Because now that speaking naughty or foolish is now, that word is in their kid's mind, and you can't take that back. And just like the people who put stuff, all this wickedness on TV, that goes in people's minds, and you can't take that back. And trying to convince people that it doesn't matter, if we define it this way between man and woman, or man and man, it's not a big deal, just change that. Well, it does matter. It doesn't matter if you don't know anybody that's gay, or it's not going to affect your family. It matters whether it's changed or not, because it affects our whole society. Everything spills out and impacts us. It changes the context of our society. It changes the context of our laws when you change definitions. And it changes context of roles and of what's acceptable and what's promotable in our society. And the fact is something that should be rejected then appears to be accepted. And how many more people will that influence who might have not done it, or might have restrained themselves from doing wickedness, but now won't because it seems normal. See, that's the insidiousness of sin. It impacts you. It comes close to you. We're going to get that in the next part, which is about leprosy, and we're going to talk about sin and location and how sin works when you get closer to it. And this is a great example of these things. So don't be quick to dissolve roles. Don't be quick to say, oh, my role, I don't like my role, so I'm going to dissolve it. I want to be equal to a man or above a man, or I should be president or whatever. There's all kinds of things. I'm sorry, I'm more traditional because I look at the structures that God sets up, and it doesn't have to do with value. Are you kidding me? It in no way says women are not valuable as a man. It's different roles. But is there different authority? Absolutely. Is there a value and lesson to be learned from having the different authority? Sure there is. But you know what? Women, I love Eliyahu does a wonderful teaching on, I think it's Eliyahu.com or something like that, on women. And it was brilliant because it really talked about how people disregard it, like, what do you mean I'm just going to have to be, someone's wife or this and that? And they don't understand. You are teaching the next generation. You're responsible for ultimately impacting how people are, their personalities, their graciousness, their kindness, everything. The relationship of a mother to her children, both male and female, changes the whole world. And again, the breakdown in the family changes this world also in the negative way. And that's what we see. We see attack in the family. Oh, we shouldn't be having kids. Oh, you got to chase your career. You can't have more than one kid or no kids because they're really an inconvenience, and shove them into daycare and get back to work, and don't have relationships with them and let their friends and teachers raise them, and bring them home, say hi to them, put them to bed, and go back to your job the next day. That's slavery. And that's a destruction of the family. And then, hey, oh, by the way, they're their own people. Don't try and control them, and don't try and teach them anything. And you really can't force them. You can't pick their friends. You can't pick their spouses. You can't do any of this. Why try? It's difficult. Look, they're 15 and rebellious. Just no sense in trying. You might as well give up. Let them do what they want. They're in love with that loser drugged out guy. Oh, that's okay. Just let your daughters run off and start whoring themselves around. You really can't control them, and you shouldn't try and force religion on them and do all this. It's all garbage. It's all the same story of laziness. You want to know what's difficult? Marriage is difficult. You want to know what's difficult? It's difficult being a husband. Having an unruly wife. You know what's difficult? It's difficult being a wife. It's difficult serving a husband who's imperfect. But that's part of your lesson. And part of the husband's lesson is learning to be a leader and learning to correct another adult when it means that we're going to have an argument, when it means that it's going to be uncomfortable and her friends aren't going to like me and all this and that. You know what? That's part of it. This isn't this. This is part of your role as a leader. Look at any of the presidents. No matter what you do, half the country's going to hate you. And that's a tough job. Their hair turns gray for a reason, because it's a job where no matter what you do, if you read books to a kid, well, you're indoctrinating them. If you do something, you shouldn't have done that. If you don't do something, hey, why didn't you do that? No matter what you do, people are going to be angry at you. But that doesn't stop you from being a leader. And that's what has to happen in the households. So we look at these roles, and we see that they're important. And we need to learn how to respect the structures and the roles and the authorities and our position, both as a servant. Learn how to bow your head down and be a servant. And also, in areas where you're supposed to be leading, learn how to lead and take responsibility, and don't be lazy. These are things that the man, the woman, and the children all have to learn. And we all have to learn them in accordance to God, in accordance to the people in authority over us, in accordance to our relationship with the people we're in authority over, and the responsibilities we have, and in accordance to the children in the next generation. and letting them see an example of what structure looks like, what authority and submissiveness looks like. What does that relationship of a master and a servant look like? What does that relationship of a husband and a wife look like? What does as the other kids learn from how you treat the other kids, what does the relationship between a mom and the kids, and the level of respect should be there, and the dad and the kids? If the kid disrespects dad, and then the other kids say, oh, see, there's my example. You see, this is how the world works. And so everything matters, and how we take care of these roles and stuff. So next we get to judgment. And we see this concept of leprosy. Now, the first part, when you read these laws of leprosy, you think, oh, what is this? This is crazy. The burning flesh, the burning that breaks out of a boil, right? All of these things sound horrible. But the interesting thing is that we see that something's wrong, right? That's how leprosy works. You see, the good news is when you have the raw flesh or the burning flesh that breaks out of, right? There's a problem there. Okay? You're starting to get splotches on your skin and sores and all this and that. There's something wrong. And the first thing we're commanded to do is show the priest. I think that's a great model. It's an interesting model that we don't see that much anymore of. You know what happens? The problem right now? We don't even know when something's wrong. We're ignorant to the Torah, so we don't know the sins that we're doing. It's just like the video I posted on my wall. It was a great conversation piece. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. It showed the guy who breaks into the, I don't know if he breaks in, but he's in the church and he starts criticizing him about keeping Easter. And at first he's like, hey, and we should follow God and not learn the ways of the heathens, and they're all, amen, amen. And then he's like, so how do you get 3 days and 3 nights from Friday to Sunday? You guys are following Easter, which is pagan origins and all this. Next thing you know, he said he's being rebuked and he's cast out of the church. And then some people say, oh, he shouldn't have, done it that way. He should have gone privately to the pastor. And other people are saying, no, the truth is the truth. And, you don't have to sugarcoat it. The interesting thing that I see is that our big problem is they didn't know any difference. They're doing Easter, they have no idea that it's totally pagan. And even Messianics, they don't know the Torah that well, a lot of people, and so they're sinning ignorantly also. They're still got tons of leftover theology from Christianity that they're still trying to make work, and we're saved and that's the whole point of everything, but hey, we keep the Torah because we are saved. BS. You don't keep the Torah because you're saved. That isn't even logical. I'm sorry. That might be how you reconcile keeping your salvation doctrine from Christianity, and that the whole Bible must be about salvation, and then but we have the Torah, and you don't want to give this up, right? So you just combine them together, just like the pagans didn't want to, the Christians didn't want to be persecuted, but they didn't want to join in the festivals of the pagans and the Romans, so they just said, hey, well, we'll keep the festival, but we'll say it's Jesus' birth, or it's Jesus' resurrection, or all that. And they did the same thing. They mixed two things that don't really logically go together. The fact is, you can't have salvation as the reason for keeping the Torah, because salvation wasn't given before the Torah. It's basic logic. Even the concept of a sin sacrifice, right, wasn't given before the commandment. You wouldn't need a sacrifice if there was no law given that you had to obey. So to say, well, we have the sacrifice, and because we have the sacrifice, now we'll keep the commandment, or the commandment's important because of the sacrifice. No. Just like the very beginning of the Bible, the commandments are given first. And the first sacrifice, where God clothes Adam and Eve, with skins, that was the death of an animal to cover their sin, their nakedness. That happened after. The first was the commandment was given. Then when they broke the commandment, then there's a need for a sacrifice. Then there's need for blood. But you don't say, oh, I keep the commandments because I'm saved. That logic doesn't work. That's just bad theology and bad logic. The fact is, you keep the commandments because that's the foundation. The first thing given was the commandments. You're commanded to keep the commandments. And if you kept the commandments, you wouldn't need a sacrifice. And the sacrifice just gives you a second chance to get back on track to keeping those commandments again when it should have been you that was killed. Your blood that was shed. Instead, an innocent animal's blood is shed. Or in the case of Mashiach's blood is shed. Not as the first foundation. It's not about salvation. Salvation is a great thing and a blessing and a second chance for people to stay and get back in alignment. To get back, right? John the Baptist said, make straight your paths, right? Get correct with the Torah, for the kingdom is near. That's what it's about. So when Mashiach comes, he gets you correct again and gives you another chance. Why? Because the kingdom is still coming. The kingdom is still near. And you better be right if you want to get into the kingdom. Not you better be saved. You better be right. Because as it says, don't think that the adulterer or the whoremonger or all those types of people are going into the kingdom. It says don't think that. They're not. If anybody gets in there and starts doing that, it's going to be just like it was in the wilderness when God came and dwelled with His people, gives them the law, and then what happens? They started sinning, they're getting wiped out. And no, they're not going into the kingdom because they sinned and they didn't obey God, right? God sent the spies, they spoke evil, they didn't go in and take the land, they disobeyed God. They even repented from it. They said sorry, but they weren't right. They wanted the kingdom for the kingdom's sake. They got off track from obeying God. That's between them and God. But the fact was, they disobeyed. Obey, just as it says. It says it in Samuel. It's better to obey than to sacrifice. Okay? Because again, obedience means you wouldn't need that. The sacrifice makes up for your disobedience. It doesn't give you the right to keep disobeying, or it doesn't justify your disobedience. No way. If that was the case, it would be a bribe. It would say, hey, God, your son died, so will you look the other way? I know you told us you shall not murder, you shall not steal, and you shall keep the Sabbath and all that. You know, you gave us the commandments, but I'll tell you what. I got some of your son's blood here. I mean, that's your son. There's nothing more valuable than that. If I give that to you, will you look the other way? Will you say it's okay? Will you justify my sin? Will you look the other way? See, when someone keeps sinning, but pays to not get a punishment, that's like paying off a judge. So even though you sinned, you're not repentant, you're still a murderer or a thief, but if you pay that judge off with something valuable enough, what did the old mafia stuff do? Right? We got your family. Right? You better give us a good judge or we're going to kill your family. That's mafia tactics. That's the same thing as saying, hey, look, we don't want to obey your law. Not only that, we disobeyed it. You know, for the people who think they still don't have to obey it, they want to say basically, hey, I got your son. I got his blood. You're going to let me into the kingdom, right? Because I'm paying you a lot. And you're going to look the other way and let me stay a murderer, a thief, a liar, an adulterer. I don't think God's going to take... As a matter of fact, one of the things the Torah teaches us about a just judge is they can't take bribes. Okay? They cannot alter their judgment because of their own personal gain or motives. I know this is going to be a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow when they hear this. They think, oh, that's insane. How you can't compare Messiah with a mafia tactics or this and that. I'm sorry. Look at it plainly and tell me if you're not trying to bribe God into justifying you. You know how it doesn't work? Right? It doesn't mean his sacrifice doesn't have a very important position and value, but I'll tell you where that position works. If you repent. You see, if you're no longer a murderer, then he offers himself. And he says, basically, okay, this guy who was a murderer, who was a liar, who was an adulterer, but now isn't. He changed. And instead of throwing away and condemning and punishing that person who is no longer a thief, but at past times he was a thief, now let me offer myself as a sacrifice to give him a second chance, because now he's not a thief. See, this is the key that people miss in the whole New Testament. They miss the whole concept where it says repent. Just like John the Baptist said, repent for the kingdom is near. He didn't say forget about it, no need to repent. Once Messiah comes and dies, you're good. He didn't say be saved for the kingdom is near. He didn't say that. Because that requires no responsibility. That's just a bribe. Not even a bribe that you had any part of. Okay? That means you just say, hey, I believe, and all of a sudden, all your debt's going to be paid, and you can keep on sinning, and what you do doesn't matter, and you're going to get huge rewards. Please, give me a break. If that's the case, you're going to believe the same people who call you up and tell you you won the Scandinavian lottery, and they want your bank account number. Okay? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. A lot of people get scammed because they want to believe it. The fact of the matter is that it makes sense if he offers himself up for those people who are no longer doing those things. He's applying to the blood. It's how the sacrificial system works. Okay? If you didn't repent, the sacrifice means nothing. The sacrifice is a bribe. That's what the children of Israel got in trouble with the sacrificial system. Hey, I have an extra goat, I guess I can commit adultery because I'll just bring my goat up there, offer it as a sin sacrifice, and call it good. I can pay to sin. It's like the Catholic Church was doing with indulgences. Right? It doesn't work that way. God's not going to take a bribe. That is not the focus. The focus is you become a righteous person. You do what's right. You learn God's laws and learn to obey it. And every day try and find the sin that's inside you and alleviate it and get rid of it. You see, these lepers that were out here, what were they doing out there? First of all, look at the pattern. They know something's wrong. They consult the priest. That's like going to the Torah. Right? The problem is we don't know anything's wrong. We don't know we have a blister, right? Just like in Revelations it says, because you say you're full and in need of nothing, but you don't know that you're naked and wretched and miserable and you have putrefying sores, right? We just got done with, I don't know if it was in the half Torah or not, but it talked about, your sores. He's talking about Israel and how their sores were rotten and filthy and not healed. And here's Israel's problem. When you think that there's no sin or you already got it covered or whatever it is, even when you are too lazy to study the Torah, the fact is then you don't see your sin. How can you go to the priest if you don't realize you're a leper? See, leprosy, that's the ABCs, that's the play school version of seeing sin. Oh, I got a raw burning sore on my thing. Okay, no question, I need to go show that, right? See, people think, oh, that'd be mean living, in a community where God was giving people leprosy. I mean, right? Because right now, we don't see our sin. It's all over us, and we think we're still fine. We're so lazy we don't study, and so we don't even know sins that we're doing or not doing. Because we don't care to study. And when we study, we don't study to find new things that's wrong with us. We study to find who the third rider of the apocalypse is, and the hidden deep meaning of the secret Sabbath timing and God's new calendar and all these other things, instead of trying to find what's wrong with us. See all these guys making DVDs and selling all this, and they want you to follow them and be some great teacher and all that, right? They're selling all these exotic doctrines, these things that sound interesting. Nobody else ever saw it that way. What about the things that you can see if you just open your eyes? What about eating kosher correctly? What about keeping your word? What about what it means to keep the Sabbath? What about nidah, right? Separating yourself from your wife when she's menstruating. I mean, these aren't glamorous, exciting things to talk about. I don't hear people releasing the hot new DVD about nidah, okay? And I don't see people observing it either. The fact is that these are God's commandments. These are the bread and butter. These are the things that we look and go, wait a minute, I'm not doing anything when it comes to that. What could I do? What should I do? Well, that causes you, those good questions cause you to study. And then there you go, you get into it. How does this pertain? What does this mean? What else does this mean? All these things do mean additional things. So that concept of leprosy teaches us that we need to be able to see what's wrong before we can go to the priest. We need to see our sin before we can go and try and fix it. And the Torah facilitates that. The Torah is the priest. Mashiach, Christ, he says he is the Word, right? He's the priest. You go to him, and that helps you see what's wrong, and the details there outline how the priest is supposed to observe it. What do they look for? Is the hair white? Did it turn yellow? What's going on? Right? All the details are there too. We get the basics that something's wrong, and this is how it really works when you change your life to following God. You realize, hey, life without God, there's something wrong. I don't know what it is. That's a boiling scab on my arm. It doesn't seem right. I'm going to go to the priest. I'm going to go to the Bible. And I'm going to read it, and then the Bible starts going, well, does it seem somewhat dark, or is it lower than the skin? Is there a hair in it? And it starts, oh, yeah, you're unclean. Oh, there's something I'm doing that is not clean. It's not good. It's not in alignment with God, right? It shows you in the natural model when there's a problem. And then it's just like the Torah shows us when we have a problem spiritually and we read, oh, I read something, but I'm not doing that. Oh, should I be? Oh, yeah, you just saw a big burning gash on your arm. Look further. Look at the details. See the priest. Okay? These are the signs. The signs and instructions are given to the priest of what to look for. The signs and instruction are given to us through the Torah of what to look for, not in others, but in ourselves, to find our own sin. This is a relationship, right? He says he didn't come for the whole, right? But a lot of people, the delusional people of Revelations, think they're whole. Just like he said to the publican who says, oh, I'm glad I'm not like this guy, over here. I tithe, I give this, I pray, I fast, I do all this, right? And he says it's the guy who wouldn't even look up to heaven and is like, no, I know I'm horrible and blah, 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 right? He knows he's a leper. He's covering his lip, crying, unclean, unclean. He admits what he's doing is wrong. That he's not right. That he's got putrefying sores. He admits it for all to know. He's gone outside the camp. He knows he doesn't belong. He knows to everyone around him he's going to proclaim it, okay? This is the models that teach us. And we get to spend the time with the Word, the priest, right? The high priest. Mashiach's that priest. And we get to spend time with him all the time, again and again and again, to look over us. Let that Word of God look over you and examine you. And find out what's wrong. He came for the sick, to heal that which is sick, to find that which is lost. Right? There's all kinds of parts in your body, your mind and your spirit, that are putrefying sores. And if you don't go in with the right attitude to the Word of God and use it to find out what's wrong with you, then you're wanting to talk to the priest about the news, about the weather, when you're talking to the most skilled physician in the world, you might want to ask him, hey doc, could you check me out? Could you see how I'm doing? Because you actually have life-threatening diseases going on in you, but you're oblivious to it. And when you go to the Word of God, you want to be buddies with the best physician in the world, but you never bother to ask him to look you over. Because you're afraid, maybe, of what he might find. He might tell you you're sick. And that's what happens in real life. People don't go to the doctor because they don't want to find out that they're sick or they got problems. But if you don't find out, you can't fix it. If you wait, you'll just wait until your denial turns into a death sentence. I mean, that's what happens. It's what happens physically. It's what happens spiritually. So these lepers are cast out. This is about taking responsibility. You don't get to just go live your life the way you want as a leper in the children of Israel. When you see a problem, you take it to the priest. And the priest doesn't just look the other way. He tells you and pronounces you unclean. And now you're cast out. You go out. And now you rip your clothes, your garments. You cover your lip and you cry, unclean, unclean. And I always thought, what is it that matters in this time? You're out there for 7 days. It talks about shutting up the house, shutting up the garment, shutting up the leper. And we're going to come back and we're going to look. Why shut up? Why wait? You know, why not be like the sacrificial system where we just, you know, we kill a couple turtle doves, we throw a mink out there, we call it good, and I'm instantly healed. Because I think the plague of leprosy is very interesting in the pattern of sin. Because it's the sins that we're delusional about that we deny. It's the sins of pride, just like when Miriam was struck with leprosy for speaking out against Moshe. Here again, why wasn't Aharon struck with leprosy? Well, we get another scenario, a man and a woman. Both of them, family members of Aharon, or of Moshe. They both spoke out against him. But we don't see what happened to Aharon. They both are corrected, but it's Miriam, I believe, because she was a woman. Because she was also in a lower position of authority, say, than Aharon, who was both a man and who was the high priest. And it doesn't mean what he did was right. It was wrong as well. But there's different types of sin. Two people can do a sin and do it for different reasons. You know? And Miriam got struck with leprosy. And I think when we look in the scriptures and we see the things and the people who got struck with leprosy, there's some interesting things. We see some leaders, right? And it may be a pride issue. It may be an authority issue in related sin. I don't know. It doesn't say exactly. We can just hypothesize. But the point is you have to go and you have time alone. You got 7 days. What are you doing? You're admitting. You're crying out, unclean, unclean. Even if you don't believe it's your fault. Even if you want to blame God. God put this upon me. Unclean, unclean. That's why I think it says you look on them and if it doesn't clear up, you send them out, right? Time alone. Time separated. Until they make the connection. I'm unclean. I don't belong in the kingdom with everybody else. I don't belong interacting with other people. I am unclean and I would spread my uncleanness to them. Until you humble yourself and you go down in humility and you admit it and you understand the sin that's within you, the uncleanness that's in your flesh, until you own it, in my opinion. That's what I think changes. I think that's the difference from being shut up for 7 days and the plague is stopped versus you get shut up for another 7 days. Or, like it says, when it's in his head, that then he's utterly unclean. His plague is in his head, right? Head is a model of authority in the scriptures, right? It's like Paro. He refused to let the people go. In my opinion, his plague was in his head, right? Because his will, right? Just like the neck that wouldn't bend, then God will break it. His will was the problem. His pride and his will and his authority were an issue because it was a struggle between the authority of God and him. And when he decided that his authority was greater than God's authority, his plague was in his head. And he was, destroyed. So we see Time alone matters. Confession, humility, acceptance. Okay? And then there's waiting for the priest, waiting to see. 7 days, waiting to see. At the point that you've been out there, you've suffered, you've been an outcast, you've admitted to everybody around over and over that you're unclean. How must that feel to see that priest? To want to see that priest? To want that 7 days? And the thought, what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm not clean? What if my sores are not healed? Then I know it's another 7 days of being shut out from the community, of crying unclean, unclean, of being out here. And it's that humility to God to see the sin and to humble yourself, and the anticipation that you hope when that priest comes out that what he sees is the good things, right? It's like holding up that Torah and reading and going, oh, there's the laws of the Sabbath. Oh, I'm so glad I'm now keeping those. I wasn't keeping those correctly. And now when I read that, I am obeying that. Right? Versus them saying, wait a minute. Just like he observes, oh, is this darkish? Has it healed? Or is this still unclean? Right? As we read the Torah, we let the Torah, like the priest, look over us and tell us, am I in alignment with that? Or I'm still not like the words I'm reading. I'm still not like all of those great men of the Torah who obeyed God. Every story we learn something new. Another area we may be disobeying. And we try and seek to be like Avraham. Right? Would Mashiach say, I would that you were one with me as I am one with the Father. Right? The great people who followed God, all those people obeyed God. And that's what Mashiach did. He obeyed God. And so he was like all of them. They were one. They were in the same bloodline. They were children of Elohim, because not my will but thy will. That's the connector. He says, who is my mother? Who is my brother? Those who do the will of my Father. That's exactly what I'm saying. So, waiting to see, waiting for that priest. Understanding judgment and pride. See, our problem is, a lot of the bad theologies are, there's not going to be a judgment. It's about salvation. And you're already saved because you believe. I'm sorry. You know, if you say you believe, right, it goes back to James. It says the devils believe and tremble. Don't you know, O foolish man, faith without works is dead. What is works? It's just a measuring stick. What is faith? To be faithful is to stay doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's that there was a measurement, right? Faithfulness, right? If a wave crashes on a dam and the dam doesn't break, it's a faithful dam, right? If somebody stands in the road and a car's coming at them and they don't move, they stayed faithful. Okay? People need to figure out what faith means, because faith doesn't mean just believing something. Faith is the evidence of, after a test, of what your response was to that test. Abraham was faithful because he was going through with the killing of the sacrificing of his son. It was counted to him for righteousness. Righteousness means doing the right things. Faithfulness means you were tested and you did the right thing. To have faith, to be faithful, it's all the same thing. Like a husband being faithful to his wife. He was tested and he stayed true. Okay? That all requires a standard. And what is the standard? The standard is the Torah. So it all goes back to obedience to the Torah, because that's what produces, that's the proof of faith, that's the fruit. Those are the works. Judge every man according to his deeds, as it says. All of these things all point back to the same thing. Obedience, righteousness, faithfulness, works, deeds, perfection, being one with Mashiach. He exemplified all of these things. And this parashah is interesting because we see that leprosy comes out in 3 different key forms. Is it in me? Right? Is it in the skin somewhere? It breaks out of the boil. It's on the beard. It's on the head. Wherever. Is it in me? Then it goes into the clothes, right? And then it goes into the house. Notice the distance levels there. Is it me? That's as close. That's part of me. The second closest thing to me is my clothes, my covering. It's a model of your righteousness, your acts. Right? Is it me? Is it what's close to me? Or what's around me? Where's the sin coming from? Right? Where's the leprosy? In your life, all of these things must be measured. What's inside you will be measured. What's close to you will be measured. Your family. Your deeds, the things, and your house. What's around you. The environment you put yourself in. All of these things can have sin. And that sin, that disease, that leprosy, it can be around you, like it was with Lot in Sodom, where it says, being in that city vexed his righteous soul. Didn't matter if he wasn't doing the sin, just having it all around him was impacting him. And then your clothes, the things close to you, is it your wife? Is it your kids? Is it your friends? Those things matter. What kind of sin is in those environments? And then you yourself. Is it in your flesh? Just like I said about Chava. He said, we shall not eat it, neither shall we touch it, lest we die. See? It's one thing to touch it. First of all, it's away. It's in the environment. It's in the garden. Right? Again, that's like the house. Then, she touches it just like the clothes. Then she eats it. It becomes part of her. See, sin, these are the 3 levels of sin that we learn about. And all of them need to be cleansed. And you need to be on guard against all of those things. And you need to confess them. You need to know those things. Unclean, unclean. What a blessing it is to understand that you're unclean. And to see those sins. So that you can be healed. As Mashiach said, if you say you were blind, then he could heal you. But because you say, you see, your sin remains with you. It's that you didn't know. You didn't cry unclean, unclean. You can't see your uncleanliness. It's interesting, the concept of the birth and the uncleanness. Right? Because we start with that and we see new life. And then we see leprosy, which is like a decay of life, a decay of your flesh. It's like the model of death. It's the difference between life and death. Freshness, renewed, and destruction. Being inside the camp, outside the camp, which is another interesting model of being in the womb. And then being born, which is then to be out of the womb. You see? And this teaches us this important concept of what are we waiting to see? How do we feel right now? How do we feel right now? Are we crying unclean? Are we humble? Or do you think you're great and it's your job to start up a ministry and go tell everybody else who's got it wrong? You see, that's a problem. We're all waiting to see the priest. Mashiach's going to come back. The question is, do you think you're all clean and you're ready to see him? And you're saying, come Mashiach now. Or are you saying, unclean, unclean, I'm not worthy. I won't even lift my eyes up to look upon you because I'm not worthy. And who will be justified? Till next time, I'm going to say Shalom.